it was really ingrained in me that volunteering, public service is a part of just what you do as a good contributing citizen. So my perspective comes a little bit more from the business side, not necessarily from the public side, but interacting with the public side from a more business perspective. I come from a very political family. My father was the Deputy Minister of Northern Affairs for Manitoba under Elijah Harper during Meech Lake. That was very interesting times. And my mother ran the Premier's office for Gary Dewar in Manitoba for his entire term. So basically grew up in a very political household. Public service was a big part of our lives as well. Both my parents started their careers out as social workers, which led to government. So it was really ingrained in me that volunteering, public service is a part of just what you do as a good contributing citizen. As teenagers often do, when it was time for me to go to university, I did the exact opposite of what they did and went to art school. So I have a fine arts degree in painting and drawing and then a master's in industrial design. And there's not a lot of manufacturing in Canada, so that starting out my career brought me down to the States. And I started out in Chicago developing products for big six retailers like Target and Walmart and things like that. But I was dating a woman, who now subsequently my wife, who was working at a law firm that happened to be the law firm that Michelle and Barack Obama worked at, which is very interesting because this was 2007, right when he kind of got swept up into the whole political campaign. And it just so happened that my office was the same office as his headquarters. So I found myself as not a citizen, not knowing even that much about the system down there, just sort of after work popping into the headquarters and volunteering at the office, really swept up in the whole concept of his campaign and the message of hope that he was giving, and spent a lot of time working on that campaign. Unfortunately, I ended up in China on election night, so I missed the party, which was a little bit disappointing. But the reason I was in China was because I got swept up in this startup that was a company that produced alternative energy equipment for developing nations and remote applications. And this was really a master class in world politics and corruption. How, Sebastian was talking about how civic politics and politics in general, government organizations really affect the lives. I was working in places like Liberia, and you could really see how important a well-organized structure of government affects the citizens there. This is a country that experienced 29 years of civil war. There wasn't a copper wire left in the city, and the government was just starting to organize itself and try and figure out ways to produce energy for its people. I worked with, I had a project in the Philippines where we sat down with a governor. It's a very corrupt country. 2 weeks later, he was murdered, and the project was completely off. We were working with the head of. I feel like I'm only telling the bad stories. There's some good ones there too, but the head of the rubber producing wing of Bridgestone tires. We were working with them to produce some energy for their projects in Ghana, and we were flying to China to view the equipment. And he had to take a turn over to the Ivory Coast because a civil war had started there, and he went down to get his people out, and we never saw him again. So when you're talking about the stability of government and good government, it's so, I have a very profound understanding of how important that institution is. While there is some negative things like Sebastian was talking about, you have to admit that that kind of structure is essential for us to have very good lives, and for someone who has children, it's very important to me. When I came back I convinced my wife to move back to Canada. I like to think of it as reverse brain drain, dragged her back here. we had our first child, I couldn't spend 2 weeks out of every month in the Philippines, so I looked for something local. And I found a really interesting job with a company here called West Coast Reduction, which is owned by Gordon Diamond. You guys may have come across him. He's an amazing philanthropist in the city. The whole company has a very good understanding of how they contribute to the community. And what my title is with them is Strategic Initiatives, which really means I get to do almost whatever I want. And one of the projects that I'm working on that's really interesting and I think has a lot of relevance to what we're talking about today is the company's first location was on the Port of Vancouver. And they've been there since 1964. And generally what happens is you get a 25-year lease. And so the last lease was about to come up, usually about 10 years before the leases come up, we negotiate the new lease. The new head of the port at the time said, we really like what you guys do, but we don't want you there. We want that spot for containers. If you guys don't know what West Coast Reduction does, I'll give you a little bit of background. Bottom line is we're a large organics recycler. It's kind of the easiest way to describe it. We take unused material from food production, we turn it into ingredients. So things like, if it's from the meat industry, we make tallow and protein. The tallow is used in biofuels. Our largest customer is BP, and our second largest is Parkland or Chevron, and they're using our materials to lower the carbon intensity of the fuels they make. And then we also make ingredients for pet food and things along those lines. Basically what we do as a core is we help the sustainability of Western Canadian agriculture is the best way to describe it. But the port thinks that the location we're in is more valuable for containers, that those 6 acres are really valuable for containers. That it's a deep sea location. Or a deep water port location, and that's essential for what they're trying to do as a port. So the argument that we're getting into, and what's really interesting about this project is it touches on all levels of government. So Sebastian was talking more about the civic right to the person. This is like almost more of a macro thing. What's better for Canada? What's more important for Canada is the argument that we're trying to make. The effect that we have on Canadian businesses versus what a container would have on Canadians in general. But the port's motivation is that the competitive aspect of ports is containers, which is totally an understandable motivation for them. But whenever you're in a government organization and you're working, you have to really understand the broad picture and the motivations of what's best for the whole as opposed to the few. So those kind of conversations are really interesting to be having, and really interesting being able to go to Ottawa, see how the system works, and understand what their motivations are. And one of the things that I've learned is, especially dealing with federal politics, is every meeting I have, they're like, I feel like I've convinced them, and what everyone says is, okay, now you have to make them. So we'll see if I can make them. That's about it. Yeah, so, thanks.